I mean, for real, for real. And I'm saying that because I know a lot of people are still waiting for, as they say, for this particular aspect of the ongoing, because it's been ongoing, it's just being more open now, war against humanity, to so-called go back to normal. Let's say this, let's make this very clear. It wasn't normal before, and it ain't normal now, and it ain't going to be normal afterwards. What you're going to do is you're going to start fixing things for real and stop the BS. But anyway, back to one point of that, what I wanted to speak on was many of you are familiar with the Reversioner article that we've been passing out to the people for maybe about 5 or 6 years. And the principle of reversion of a state we've been promoting to the people for about 15 or 16 years, trying to get them prepared. And also, let's kind of be real about this. The rejection of the Roman Curia members and the rebuttals against the United States corporation, company, contractors, employees, and pseudo de facto public officials have on its face a rebuttal for them to restore, to reclaim, and to return the resources that they've been stealing from you, whether it's been silver, gold, commerce, and hereditaments, whether corporal and incorporeal. And many people I know over the years probably are or have been looking at the concept that these beings, after we come to a certain level of momentum with the people in their consciousness, would start returning our goods, or would start governing properly according to the Constitution that was adopted from Muslim law, known as the Constitution for the United States at North America, after the enforcement and the establishment of the Treaty of Peace and Friendship. We don't have to argue that they have never honored either. Well, your history tells you that. You don't need to argue with Taji Guy about what Taji Guy has said, past or present, about that. The fact that they have never honored it is an established fact over and over again. And what you're suffering from right now, much of it involves of all of us collectively for not speaking up, for not taking a public stand for that which is right, for not taking a public stand for that which is justice, for not taking a public stand and practice for enforcement of the Constitution, for whatever reasons, for whatever biases that many have, open or secret. What you're seeing right now and what you're suffering from is the effect of that cause. And of course, there's other things, but that has much to do with it. But again, on the Reversioner, I want to read this, the cover statement, and then we're going to talk about some fundamental things that I'm aware that a lot of the people aren't aware of, just to get you all thinking, because you're going to need to be thinking. We all need to be thinking, and we all need to learn to love instead of hate. We need to learn to fix things, because I know a lot of people are waiting for, how do you say, the oligarchs to reform themselves and then come knocking on your door and start doing right. Well, truth is, the game's up, and that platform is dead. They don't know what to do because they never intended to do right. And by the people at large not really being active socially, politically, and civically, they have been accepting the miseducation of the enemies that they didn't know were your enemies, which would include John D. Rockefeller and Frederick T. Gates, who were really Trojan horse plants to set up the General Education Board to present as a structured order docility training for animals and apply it to humans. And that's called your General Education Board of 1902. Now, what you see among us at large is the product. And this is why many people are afraid, because they discover that their math doesn't work. They're afraid because they see that their education won't feed them. They see that their degrees won't keep a roof over their house, that these things that they thought were related aren't related at all. And then what do you do when you recognize that these alleged reference points have no reference point? This creates fear, because people are forced to look at themselves, to look in the mirror, to look at society. And again, because they've been trained to docility training, they're looking for the leader guy, the politician guy, the guy that preys upon them, and that's P-R-E-Y, not P-R-A-Y, to now come up with solutions. Well, they're not. You're going to have to come up with solutions. And I suggest that you start participating with people who are more honest about these things, though they may be uncomfortable, and start coming up with some rational and reasonable things, methods and platforms and organization principle to start governing yourself locally. And then it's going to have to spread out with unified principles. And if you take the truth and the rationale of studying established maxims of law and maxims of government, meaning that you don't need to reinvent the wheel, you need to go back to the principles of your ancient mothers and fathers, because they're the founders of civilization, and get away from those who have used the knowledge and use it for dark purposes. Because keep in mind, water and electricity and other elements that you have not been necessarily told about are basically in nature pretty much, in this sense, neutral for your use based on your intelligence. That would be expressed in the Bible or other holy books as the sun shines on the good as well as the evil. What it implies is that you must start taking responsibility. And those of you who have considered yourselves good, as you know, this sort of like a liberty that I think many of us have taken, sitting on your butts and being preyed upon while pretending to be praying. And so you have these persons that have less than human spirit in them. Let's keep it that simple. So we don't get too deep with that. We'll just say people that are a little less than human been governing over you while you've been sitting on your butt, talking about gods and devils that they have presented to you. And now that they've taken all of your resources and you're now kind of in a situation where you can't exactly deny that they're trying to hurt you, many of the people don't know what to do from this point. I would suggest this. Take responsibility not to feed into fears, because they feed off your fears. Take it into your responsibility not to be hateful, because they feed off of that. Take it into your responsibility to project love, even though you have all these pressures on you, because they feed on the dark side. They do. And I'm gonna get into that from a metaphysical point of view, but you really need to start recognizing that you're not dealing with people with human soul. Now that's the truth. Not further ado, let's talk about what they have presented with the bond systems. And that would, many of you have talked about and have found out about the birth certificates and the marriage certificates and the CDLs and the driver's license, and discovered with your research and examination that these people who you thought were your local, state, and federal government elected officials were actually selling you on the stock market. And what has happened is that they have been, like, they use this nice term, fractionalization, which means they've been counterfeiting on top of the counterfeiting, on top of the counterfeiting, and selling them until it created a feedback loop and it has collapsed. That's what's going on, to keep it simple for you. That's really what's going on. And though any aspect of this, we could go into what you call a technical analysis, but I don't think we should try to make this thing complex. Let's keep it simple. They've been counterfeiting the counterfeit, and then counterfeiting the counterfeit, and then selling the counterfeit on the counterfeit, and then promising and creating other instruments to sell the value on the other counterfeited instruments that they already created. And that's the result of that. They can call it inflation. As an example, when I was 19, and I was domiciled in Parkside in Camden, New Jersey area. I from my position was poor. You know, I was this poor guy, I guess. That's how I viewed it. However, I had Chrysler LeBaron, Imperial LeBaron paid for. I had a Chrysler 300 also. And I was 19 years old. Let me tell you factually, through the years, I've generated fiat far more than at that period when I was 19, but I couldn't afford those cars now, I'll tell you that. That's true, because both of them had Hemi engines in them. And both of those cars, you could probably get them at auction now. No, the Imperial had a 413, and the 300 had a Hemi in it. Those cars, you could auction them cars now for about 100,000 to 200,000 notes right now. Now, when I acquired my house under the guise of buying the house, etc., I was in Parkside, Camden, and most of those who you know that area, around that time, the community was a gated community. It was a gated community. After 5, they would close the gates right at Parkside at the entrance there. And the house at that time on the note was around just short of 8,000 notes. Yes. The my Imperial was paid for. Then the insurance man just come past the house and knock on the door, come to the door, and he says, "Is your mother home?" I says, "No, this is my house." You know, a type thing. My furniture I bought from Van Skyver, was on the waterfront where the aquarium is right now in Camden. And that is very high-end furniture. I also worked there part-time. I was also a barber. My father was a barber. Now, I had very nice furniture. I had marble tables with imported crystals from Germany. And I was poor. I was poor. That stuff I couldn't even afford now. I had picture frames with gold inlay, actual gold inlay. Now, a lot of that I got because I worked at Van Skyver, but it was still not cheap. I couldn't afford any of that stuff now. What that's an expression, a factual expression of what's going on now, what is called inflation. That same stuff that I couldn't afford then, that I could afford then poor, I can't afford now. And I could I have all kinds of skills. I could generate all kinds of finance if I choose to do, you know, and I don't. And I keep my life simple deliberately because I learned what the system really is. But I'm saying that to you, that the alleged debt doesn't exist. Now, because they have, they pretty much operate on the idea that because you, when I say you, I'm talking about us generally, collectively, have been silent, which means many of you, instead of speaking up to what things really are and the wrongs that have been really taking place against the human family, we preferred to hide behind our so-called religious beliefs and pretend that this evil that is permeating the land was not going on. In the principle of truth, that is called silence and acquiescence, tacit acquiescence, and therefore they take it as that you have consented to this misery. The problem that we have now, in reality, we don't have the options of trying to explain this to everybody who may be listening to this little talk that we're having right now, and many who haven't listened to us in the past, because we've been trying to tell people for years to try to prepare you. They just don't accept that these people, to put it bluntly, to keep it simple, are demons. That's the truth. And half of them who've been governing you are not human, and others are hybrids, and that's really the truth. Now let's get down to tax. To speak up, and this is why we had put this out and tell you what it means. Now you would interject your attribute or name, the living sentient man and rightful heir, and not lost at sea. And I affirm and declare my right of reversion of estate, and therefore I make no claim with respect to the title and misrepresented name, man of straw, and nom de guerre being a title, and the spurious creations of the foreign de facto United States corporate operators, actors, and owners. And I surrender and assign any and all reversionary interest to the foreign United States and to its subsidiaries for full acquittance, discharge, settlement, and closure of my reliance, Title 12, United States Code 95A, Part 2. I repeat, write this down so you can do some research on your own after you leave us here tonight at the House of Reawakening Minds. Title 12, United States Code 95A, Part 2. And I assume no liabilities or debts, however contrived, among its associates. And I do not consent to stand as surety, quote unquote, for the foreign, private, and for-profit United States Incorporated U.S. corporation company entity owners, directors, or their administrators, nor do I stand as surety for its subsidiaries or its associates at any point or moment in time. Now, we've been over this in the past multiple times in different conversations that we've had with the people to kind of get them in the position to protect themselves. But there's also another aspect of this that the people need to recognize, and people who understand this or comprehend this understand the principle of the argument, as well as its lawful and what you would call hereditary platform purpose. The fact of the matter is that multiple high numbers of people around the land, and we're talking about around the Moroccan Empire, that would include North, Central, South America, and the adjoining islands, because we're talking about the Aboriginal people, we're talking about America. Now we're talking about Americans. So when you're talking about Americans, recognize that you're not referring to the hybrid Albion Europeans who have been occupying North, Central, South America and corrupting all of the government platforms and robbing the people and setting forth their fiat currency, lying, stealing, and defrauding the people, claiming that they were giving them money. And this is much of the root of the problem that you're experiencing now. This is the manifest of it. Now, on their frauds, this is the claim that the kingship oligarchs who have been faking as the U.S. government officials on all levels have been alleging an alleged and false national debt that is accrued on foundation of their fraud and frauds and misrepresentation and misrepresentations and malfeasance and thievery and murders and biological warfare and contracts issued among themselves to select people to injure the people and to justify taxing them more, and then alleging that they have a debt. Fact. This is fact. United States Code, Title 12, United States Code, subsection 9A, sets forth, and you want to study this, that the debts that they've been claiming to be yours, 95A, that the debts that they've been claiming to be yours are actually their debts. And when they've been selling or sending the people bills from their different corporations, they haven't been telling the people the truth. And the interesting thing, many of you might want to ask your these so-called persons who claim to be your congressmen and your congresswomen, why didn't they tell you about this? Why didn't they tell you that that debt doesn't exist on you, and that the bills that they were sending to you through the mail, through the U.S. Postal Service? I didn't say the United States Post Office. I said the United States Postal Service, which is not the United States Postal Office, if you get the point. They're two different entities. The original legitimate constitutional platforms were overthrown. That's what their Organic Act of Congress is of 1871. But nevertheless, recognize that these alleged bills that they've been sending people in the mail are actually coupons for redemption. And the fact of the matter is, the routing numbers that they have to the different regions of their so-called Federal Reserve, etc., and the alleged defunct U.S. Treasury Department, they were supposed to satisfy all of those so-called alleged bills, which were actually theirs, since they did all pledging of all that they have created in the name of wealth off of you by robbing you. And that is the truth. And that's what Title 12, United States Code, subsection 95A, is really all about, part 2. And for those of you who are familiar with jurisprudence, you can analyze it, because you already know that many of the people have difficulty doing what you would call an etymological analysis of structured legal terms, because they're not really given erudition in relationship to human government and human erudition systems. They're only limited to what is known as docility training through education systems. So many of them can pronounce words but actually can't read, therefore they can't see past what's in their face. But that's what that involves. What it's really telling you is that the debt is theirs and is not yours, etc. Now, I was talking to Dr. Naila earlier. You know, we was having some conversations, and from the talk that we had a couple of weeks ago, and I was looking at the fact that we want to try to encourage the people not to be stuck in the malaise of false expectations of things being solved for them by these people who have created the problem in the first place. Because that's definitely not going to happen. Not at all, you know. And I know it's difficult for many of us, because they've actually imprisoned us in our own homes, in our own communities, and that's also part of the attack. It's not, and they can talk about viruses, all of which they've created. This is another interesting thing. Isn't it interesting how they can attack people for standing more than 6 feet together? And in some places, I heard just recently a young woman was actually imprisoned, sent to prison because she was in a park or something like that, and they arrested her, and she was put in prison with other people, other women, stuff, with a whole bunch of stuff for so-called violating the ban on people going into the park and stuff like that. But if you notice, while many of these politicians are talking about the jobs and the businesses closing and the meat factories closing and everything because of the coronavirus, as an example, that's just a small part of it. And other biological agents that they put out there to make people sick. Do you notice that you don't see any of these politicians arresting the people who have patents on these viruses, which means if they have patents on them, and then that's claiming ownership, that to say that these attacks on the people are any less than a biological attack is in itself disingenuous. And I think a 5-year-old child can kind of figure that out, that these people are being not honest with you. But I wanted to present, or just as a sub-argument, present the argument of the reversioner to remind many of you who have taken some of that approach to recognize that the fact that for those of you who have been standing up on truth, that it has caused many of the nations not to want to buy them bonds because they know that the heirs of the estate are speaking up and that these things are no longer negotiable. And that was intentional, because the deal of it is they're not going to fix the system. The system was corrupt and colored from the door, and the only thing that can be for the good of the people is that it be disassembled, that the system must come down. And it's unfortunate because the people are depending on a system that was actually designed to hurt them, to destroy them. And it's interesting, and it's an interesting paradox, because the people have actually built their lives around depending on agencies that they thought were there to help them, and are unwilling or unable to analyze in their minds that the persons who are running these agencies were never there to help them. But they don't put it together that the agencies not coming to their aid is a reflection of the people who are running the agencies, because the agency is inanimate. They're animated by men and women behind them who hide behind the corporation entities. So for a person who's suffering from Rockefeller docility education, starts arguing with the entity, i.e. Sears or some corporate platform, and not recognizing that the corporate platform does nothing. It is men and women who are running it, who own it, that does everything to you. And this is how they've also used their corporate platforms to hide from the people while they were attacking the people, because the people keep looking at the entities as the entities are doing it. The city did this to me. The city did that to me. You know, the state did this to me. The hedge fund did that to me. The 401k platform stole all my finance. The bank took my finance. The bank garnered my account. Except no, bank didn't garner your account. No, it was some men and women that run the bank or own the bank that's been doing this stuff to you, and that's what you need to start looking at. Living men and women who have been injuring you, who have been hiding behind their U.S. corporate entity operations. My suggestion to many of you who are listening is start clearing in your mind to separate the personage given to corporate entities and the personage of living men and women who have actually been injuring you, who you have not been directing your concentration on. And those are the ones you need to dismiss out of your lives. And you need to, at the same time, start recognizing that these agencies and institutions were designed to fail you. They weren't designed to fail. They were designed to fail you.